Of course, we're paying attention to British Columbia. How can we not? Yesterday, Arno Kopetsky with, just in my mind, a fascinating challenge for all of us to really evaluate kind of how we live and what we prioritize. And it was one of these exercises that I think it's really important to go through every once in a while, to take a look at our personal footprint on the planet. And as we look all around us, how can we ignore that things are changing? The question is, as we rebuild, and I'm talking literally, communities, homes, rec centers, highways, railroads, what's the best way to do it? What should bridges look like to be able to withstand some of the pressures that maybe we don't even quite yet fully understand? We wanted to go to sources on this that know exactly what they're talking about. Sarah Hoyles has delivered on this one. Glenn McGillivray is Managing Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, a professor in the graduate program at York University's Emergency and Disaster Management Program. Robin Edger is the National Director of Climate Change at the Insurance Bureau of Canada, formerly at Pembina Institute. And Joe Wrobel, for more than 30 years, has been in the construction industry. He's president and GM of the JPW group of companies, including JPW Road and Bridge. And he was the chair of the Canadian Construction Association for the most recent term. Glenn, Robin, Joe, thanks so much for making time for us. Joe, I want to start with you. I heard a rumor. You're one of those. You actually got your hands and your boots dirty building the Coquihalla. You're one of the guys. Your crews was help building the Coquihalla. Where's your head at right now, taking a look at the destruction on that highway and others?
Well, yes, I was involved in the design and construction phase of that, and through some of the areas that have now failed was some of the particular spots where I basically walked every inch of that. I guess when I look at it, my first thing is I'm certainly feel some sorrow for those in all of everything that's happened that are deeply affected by this disaster. But I'm relieved in some ways that there wasn't more people personally affected. In other words, there was no major people trapped or caught or swept off the roads or went into the river in any parts of the Coquihalla. So that part for sure. And then the next thing is when you look at it and you say when we constructed that one, the construction phase and the design was from 1976. It was opened in 1986. It was state of the art. It was an engineering marvel, and things have changed.
So do we have engineers right now? I mean, no, hang on. They always say, don't ask a question you already know the answer to. And I know you're going to say there are skilled and talented engineers across this country. And I know that to be true because I've hosted awards galas for engineers, and I'm always amazed at what they can do. But let me ask, Joe, is it too soon to look back and say we recognize why some of these failures occurred and we know currently how to address that moving forward? Or is there still some fact finding to do?
Well, there's definitely some more fact finding that has to occur, but it was constructed in 1986. There's been a number of changes since. The ministry, I know in some of the projects that I've worked on in the last few years, the Ministry of Transportation has put in place some sort of resilience to the infrastructure. So they have tried to incorporate some of that. So they have been making some changes to their design. There just needs to be much more.
Glenn, you're the adjunct professor in the graduate program at York University's Emergency and Disaster Management Program. This is the type of thing that'll get written right into your curriculum, right?
Well, there's no question about it. I mean, this is a biggie. I think, unfortunately, Canada's kind of graduated into the big times with this event. We see some really big events coming out of places like the United States. And, we had the Fort McMurray fire, which was quite big. But this is really big, and this kind of puts us up there with some of the other huge losses we've seen in the U.S. and globally.
So you're managing director for the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, which would lead me to believe that there has to be the premise in place that either we can better build communities and infrastructure, or we can take action on climate change to try to slow or reverse some of these trends. So how do you approach loss reduction?
Yeah, so our work is with the former. We look to build a hardened community, basically, a more resilient community, whether that's building our homes better, retrofitting existing homes, looking at infrastructure and doing the same, whether it's building new infrastructure that can handle the weather down the road, or retrofitting existing infrastructure to handle the weather that will come. That's what needs to be done, and that's where our work centers on.
Robin, stay with me while I get the question out, because I think you're going to know what I mean here. But when Sarah's briefing me on this roundtable coming up, and she says, it's really cool with Robin. She says, formerly at the Pembina Institute, now with the Insurance Bureau of Canada. And I'm going, interesting. Like, I don't know. I don't know if the Pembina Institute and the Insurance Bureau of Canada are mingling at the cocktail party. Do you know what I mean? So
I do.
So you've got a very fascinating professional background. How does that impact or influence how you view events like what we're seeing in BC?
I think it's funny because, of course, yeah, you're right. Insurers are not known to be going to the same parties as David Suzuki, but there is no area of the financial sector that is as impacted by the physical climate impacts of climate change as the insurance sector. Like I'm 41. The first 3 quarters of my life, insurers paid out on average about $422 million per year in insurable damages due to severe weather losses. In the last 10, 12 years, that number's gone up to a shade over 2 billion. Like this is impacting their bottom line, and in a way where good corporate citizenship aligns with their bottom line in a way that couldn't be more direct.
So this is, after Fort McMurray, and I don't have numbers in front of me, Robin, but I do know anecdotally that people will say, oh yeah, insurance rates went up after Slave Lake, or they went up after the Southern Alberta floods, or Fort McMurray. It just happens. Is there consensus, or at least are there rumblings within the industry, the insurance industry, that right now this is unsustainable? We're going to get to a point where people won't be able to, they won't be able to insure properties. People may be running uninsured. I don't know what that leads to, but is this, are we sort of looking ahead and seeing that iceberg and saying we better change course?
Rates are very complex, but certainly the increasing impacts of climate change don't push them in the right direction. I think the main focus is on, frankly, the same areas that I know Glenn focuses on very strongly, which is that we have to start mitigating this risk. Like we don't have a culture of preparedness in this country. We never have. We're very excited about some of the very recent announcements that the federal government has made and some of the upcoming actions in terms of, building out a national adaptation strategy and fully funding it so that we can start putting in place the adaptation measures that our communities need in order to be able to continue to have affordable insurance and just be able to live our lives in the way that we're used to living them, even as we know our climate is changing. We know that globally, the average temperature has gone up a shade over a degree. In Canada, that's 2 degrees, and in the north, that's 3 degrees. And there's no reason to believe that as the world continues to heat, that Canada won't heat at twice the rate as the rest of the world. So yeah, we do not live in a static climate anymore, and we have to take the measures to deal with that.
I want to ask all three of this. We'll go to Glenn first, Joe next, and then Robin, back to you. Glenn, you're the one that teed it up. You said we have to talk about hardened and more resilient communities. It's been an honor of mine, as a matter of fact, to MC the Alberta Emergency Management Association conferences, where you get literally 500 or 600 people in a room. The stars and bars, as everybody talks about here, with regards to the high-ranking lieutenants and chiefs and everybody involved in emergency management and first response, and a lot of people that have wildfire experience, people with flood experience, and you talk to them and learn little things. I learned little things. I did some vegetation clearing around my residential property after listening to a conversation at one of these. I didn't realize that, for example, cedar bushes right under your soffits are a really stupid landscape design, for example. That's one. But when we talk bigger picture, it's going to mean that maybe towns, mountain towns, might need bigger buffers around them. I know everybody wants the big lodgepole pines right behind their back deck, but maybe we need to start cutting those back a little bit. Glenn, what does the resilient community of the present and, more importantly, of the future look like? Let's dig into it.
Yeah, so it means different things depending on the hazard that you're talking about. Yeah. So you're talking basically about fire smarting, so getting fuel away from your home, and that's one thing that we have to do, both on the private property level and on the community level as well. Creating buffers is one thing, but embers flow far ahead of the fire front and can ignite towns like Fort McMurray, and that's really a big issue. We know how to build homes that are resilient to wildfire, and we got to get on with that work. It's not that we don't know what to do. We do know what to do. It's the political will that really doesn't exist yet. On the flood side, it's more complex. Hardening your individual home is one thing. Looking at the community is quite another. And with hazards like flood and like wildfire, you can do everything to your property, but if your neighbor doesn't do something, you're still at risk. And so, it takes this community-wide approach, this societal approach where everybody has a role to play to build in resilience. A lot of it has to start, the big picture stuff has to start with political will.
I want to ask you to follow up on that. I mean, what is political will? People always talk about political will. I don't know that, I can't say we never see it. Sometimes we see it in directions that people don't appreciate. Political will certainly exists, but if a politician through the course of a short election cycle doesn't think that they're going to see return on putting their neck out there and making unpopular decisions, chances are it's not going to happen. So Glenn, how does that happen? Is it public pressure? I mean, what would you forecast might be effective?
Well, sometimes it just takes a star, somebody that supports an initiative and gets it going. The mayor of High River, Alberta, has said, he has made his town the most flood resilient town in the country. He said this was after the 2013 flooding, and they've taken many measures in High River to try to prevent a repeat of that flooding from happening. So it was the mayor in that case that really led the charge and got some things changed. Canmore, Alberta, known very well for wildfire resilience, has done some fantastic things there. So sometimes it just takes one advocate to push. It could be the mayor, it could be somebody on council, it could be a citizen.
Yeah.
But it goes a long way sometimes. But when somebody says, you know what, we have to do better, we have to build back better, we have to build new infrastructure better, whatever it happens to be, when that happens at the top, and when it happens with the people that pay the checks, things start moving in the right direction, and we need more of that.
I should mention High River's Mayor Craig Snodgrass was with us just a couple of days ago with Corb Lund, the country singer, talking about coal. I mean, that guy's punching outside his weight class on a lot of fronts. It's great. Joe, I can see you as Glenn's talking. You're sitting there. You're nodding your head. I can tell you're like, will you give me the damn mic, Jespersen? So here it is. I mean, do you see some of this stuff happening?
Yes. Well, as I said earlier, some is happening right now in a smaller amount. We just need it to expand. And I think Robin mentioned something about the national adaptation strategy, and that's clear. We need a national strategy, and we need the government, we need policymakers, we need the builders, we need stakeholders to all come together. We have to come together around the common purpose of improving infrastructure resilience. It's not going to come without a cost. There will be a cost to it. So it's going to take some, and I agree wholeheartedly with Glenn, that it takes a star, a champion, somebody to champion or an advocate, but it's going to take some public pressure. As the taxpayers, we're going to have to decide that, yes, we think it's worthwhile to invest. We're going to be willing to spend more money, because some of this resilience is going to be, when you're looking at, for instance, just use a bridge that may have a certain span and that's failed now. Well, what may happen when it's rebuilt, the span may need to be wider to allow more water to go through without washing it out. The protection that was on the river, on the banks, to hold in those fills, those bridge end fills, and the road end fills, needs maybe larger riprap, larger size, more protection, something to protect it. So that all comes with a cost, and it's going to be the taxpayer that's going to have to decide, yes, we want to do it, but it's going to take everybody pulling together with that same common purpose.
Joe, do you have you're going to look at me and say, what a dumb question, but I just have to ask you, do you have an ish number of what you think that cost increase might look like? For example, if a bridge is going to be $180 million or $300 million for this big, beautiful bridge, you go, yeah, now a more resilient, climate change ready, fortified bridge. If it was going to be 180, now it's going to be 230 or 240. We talking 30%, 50%, 100%. What do you think?
I don't even want to hazard a guess on that particular one, because there's
you're going to be bidding for them, right? Yeah.
Well, there's too many variables involved in that particular one. Like, just to give you a small example, I was involved in some flooding that occurred in our area approximately 3-4 years ago. there was a small minor road that had a 2-foot culvert or a 600 millimeter culvert, a 2-foot culvert. When we restored it, the driving surface, we upped it to a 1-meter culvert or say a 3-foot culvert. After some design work that was done by the Ministry and Ministry of Environment got together and said, look, for some adaptation and some resilience, we're going to change that. We went in, we took it out, and we replaced it with a 2-meter pipe arch. So we went much larger just because of the changes that had occurred. So as I said, it's not necessary. So you had something that was existing, and we went from 600 millimeters up to 2 meters. That's huge in difference. So I don't know what the number is going to be, and there's so many different factors involved. So I can't even hazard a guess on that particular one.
I feel like maybe now's the time, though, to have the conversation. We have such short memories as humans. You know what I mean, Joe?
Absolutely. I was listening to one interview just a few days ago, and someone mentioned, and I agree with them, that we probably have a 6-month to maybe 12-month window, which everyone has attention. This issue is front and foremost in front of everybody's mind. So this is a time when we need to take some action. And this is something, when I was chair of the Canadian Construction Association, we commissioned a study, and we issued a report on March 25th of this year, entitled Strength, Resilience, and Sustainability. And it's the construction sector's recommendations on adapting to climate change. And really, there's a number of recommendations in it, but really the first and foremost one is that, as I mentioned earlier, is we need to come together, and we need to align. Procurement and design must be aligned. We must look for and allow innovation to occur as well. There's a lot of intelligent, smart, innovative individuals and companies in this country that will come up with solutions. We just need to give them the opportunity to do it.
When we come back from this very quick break, fellas, you have 60 seconds to top up your coffee if you want it. I'm going to ask Robin Edger from the Insurance Bureau of Canada whether or not people that are rebuilding are required to build back in place, or whether it even makes sense for us to rebuild some of these communities. Maybe Lytton. I mean, would half of South Calgary been rebuilt if we were having these conversations back in 2013, 2014? I'll tell you who's not going to put cedar bushes right under your soffits and fascia. It's Mike at Eden Landscaping, because with more than 20 years experience, Mike has seen it all. He thinks it through, and he allows his intuition and his professional experience to blend and to meld with his creative spirit to create a portfolio like you can see right now at landscapeedmonton.ca. You go, well, I want a bit more of a modern look, or I want a bit more traditional look, or I want the rustic look or the natural look. Mike goes, yep, check, check, check. We've done it. He can put you in touch with people if you want, sort of the customer testimonial type of thing. They got it right on their website, landscapeedmonton.ca. Now's a great time to open the door to that conversation so you can hit the ground running in spring. Our friends at Park Power want to remind you that, in the spirit of frugality, in the spirit of keeping more money in your jeans, as they say, the wholesale Alberta electricity price over the last while has been really volatile. It's actually been relatively expensive this year. You probably know, right? If you've been on the variable rate or the regulated rate option, you'll notice your power bills may have been higher over the past number of months. Well, it's a great opportunity to consider protecting yourself by switching to a fixed rate offering. So Park Power offers flexible fixed rates. You can go 1 or 3 year terms. You want to know the best part? You're never locked in. You want to change your mind? It's not like the cell phone company where, no, you got 27 more months left. Can you tell I had a conversation with them this week? 27. Not Park Power. And the promo code 2021-Real Talk gets you $70 off your first bill. How great is that? Our friends at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge are thrilled right now to have Ram 1500s back in stock on both their lots. And of course, you can check out that selection online. They've got a limited time offer that ends December 1st. And so you don't want to snooze on this one, with great discounts, almost up to $10,000 on the 1500s, up to 10% off MSRP on the Jeep lineup. Trusted brand since 1941. You'll find them under the sponsors tab on our website, ryanjespersen.com. Robin Edger hanging out with Joe Wrobel, Glenn McGillivray, three great perspectives as we evaluate what's going on in BC and how the country, in particular right now, that province, but bigger picture, how we should fortify communities, how we should rebuild after natural disasters. Robin, it prompts the question, as many people obviously ask, should we be building in some of these spots? I mean, more Canadians know now than they did 2 weeks ago that the Abbotsford area, we drained a lake about 100 years ago to make way for agricultural land, and well, it appears as though Mother Nature has something to say about that. We've seen floodplains prove to be problematic. We see communities in boreal forests run major risks. Now, you're obviously here speaking on behalf of the IBC, but maybe a little bit of personal opinion as well, as long as we identify it. I mean, should we be rebuilding in some of these areas?
It's going to be really context specific, and it's going to be very dependent on the actions that government and society are willing to take to mitigate the risk in these areas. There are areas of the country, we estimate about 6 to 10%, where under the current conditions, the homes are not insurable. I think going forward, that means that you have, at the highest level, you've got two choices. Either you put the adaptation resilience measures in place to make those homes insurable, to ensure that homes aren't subject to repeated flooding or repeated wildfires, or you have to look at managed retreat. And in different countries around the world, they've taken different approaches. And again, it's very context specific. But certainly we saw in Washington State over the last 5 or 6 years, 700 homes were removed from an area just because they were repeatedly being flooded. And the feeling was that the costs of making those homes sort of livable and safe far exceeded the cost of managed retreat. So yeah, it's really going to be dependent on the context.
Robin, I know you're going to say, well, Jespersen, it obviously depends on a person's policy and every policy is different. You can't ask me a question like this. It's totally unfair. That in mind, let me ask you this question. If somebody has had, and I don't want to sort of be, we're all laughing and I caused that, and then I ask you a very serious question, but let's say somebody right now is going, my $750,000 house and my $15,000 side-by-side, my $70,000 pickup and all of our belongings and everything is a total loss. The flood carried away our Quonset and everything's demolished, and they're looking at $1 million claim. And right now they go, we're not quite sure we want to rebuild here after what we just saw. And we think we might actually move to Moncton with our $1 million. Based on the policy, obviously there may be caveats in place, but is that an option for people?
I won't repeat the caveat that you just mentioned, but certainly traditionally that was not the case. That it used to be that you had to build in place, and that has changed relatively recently. Where it is relatively common now, where in your policy it is possible to receive actual cash value for your home, so that you don't have to build in place, and it's to incentivize the sort of behavior that you just described.
Glenn, does that need to be part of the conversation on basically loss reduction, catastrophic loss reduction? Do we have to have a national or provincial or municipal conversation about where we will or will not rebuild?
There's no question about it. I mean, what we build, how we build it, and where we build it are absolutely key. And, as far as the conversation of should we talk about moving people, I've commented on this in the media many times over the last few years with flooding in Ottawa area, New Brunswick once again, places like that. We do have to have that discussion for very high risk people. In the United States, buyouts are very common. They've had 17 or 18,000 examples of communities that were bought out and moved because of flood risk. We have some examples of ad hoc projects we've done in Canada, but not enough of them. So we have to talk about this, and we have to talk about mandatory buyouts as well. Voluntary buyouts don't work. We tried it in Southern Alberta after 2013, and it was an abject failure. We've had mandatory buyouts in the Toronto area after Hurricane Hazel in 1954, and they were a great success. So kind of two things are key here. Making a buyout mandatory, number one, and reimbursing the homeowner for fair market value, pre-flood market value. Those two things are go together very well.
Glenn, just so we understand what you're talking about, mandatory buyouts, like, hey, everybody pick up, you're moving?
Yes.
Wow.
So something like 80 people died in the Toronto area as a result of Hurricane Hazel in 1954. The government rolled in and said, we're moving you out. They offered or gave people pre-flood market value for their home. And those communities along the Don River and other places were made into parks. And those parks flood almost every year now, but nobody gets killed and no property is damaged. There was a buyout in Sydney, Nova Scotia after the Thanksgiving Day flood of a couple of years ago, and people actually asked for it. It wasn't imposed on them. They asked for it. 18 homes were bought out and turned into green space.
I mean, I guess, I'm taking a look at how we do, expansion of transit infrastructure in urban centers, and it's no different than that. I don't know why I'm acting so surprised. I mean, governments come in and tell entire crescents or entire avenues of people that they're moving, and here's what we're giving you for your house. So, I mean, it's certainly far from unprecedented.
Right. But there's a public safety angle to it.
Yeah.
And, sometimes we have to ask the question, is it fair for Canadian taxpayers to have to pay for somebody's river view, and somebody wants to, continue to live on a river, and they get flooded every few years, and the property is damaged, and they get public disaster assistance, and all Canadians are paying for that. Is that a reasonable thing to do? Is that sustainable? Can we continue this? These are tough conversations, and my heart would go out to people who are facing this dilemma, but sometimes tough love is in order. And we have to think about this for high risk individuals. We're not talking about everybody here, but for people that are in a very high risk scenario.
Hey, it's a fair point. And when you put it like that, it's going to get people's attention, right? Does this deserve to be essentially a national liability to protect somebody's view? Joe, I have a question for you, a focused one, but I see you've been scribbling notes, and I'm just really curious to know what's on your pad of paper. What's jumping out at you?
Well, what jumped out at me was when Glenn was talking about what we do with the high risk situations. I was going back to remembering what you said right at the start of this, Ryan, about the fires and dealing with the cedars. And there's a lot that will happen and has happened. We learn from this. I was in the wildfire area here in the North Okanagan Shuswap, and I hadn't really thought about how we would handle our evacuation. But when we got in that, we were put on notice. We set a plan in place. We're ready. I'm not prepared to leave my house. I love my property. I love where we live. It's fine. But I can tell you the next time it comes up, we are going to be much more prepared. And I see that happening. I think I've seen it happening. The disaster I dealt with, I know an individual who runs a seniors residence in Merritt. And they had to evacuate that seniors residence for the wildfire situation. They did that. They had to again evacuate it due to Merritt being evacuated, dealing with their wastewater and their water system problems that they had. They learned an awful lot from the first one. It made their move the second time, although difficult, much better, and it went much smoother than it did the first time. So, we tend to learn from this, and so there's many things that can happen and will happen on account of what this particular emergency event occurred here in British Columbia.
Joe, this is the question I wanted to ask you, and we'll make this the last one. Gentlemen, We're so appreciative of your time, but I know nothing about what goes into building something as massive and impressive as the Coquihalla Highway. And as white-knuckle, nerve-wracking of an experience as it can be, it's also just an absolute marvel. And so please don't roll your eyes at the question. I would imagine that clearing space for a highway like that, through terrain like that, and we could also talk about Rogers Pass and the Crow's Nest Pass, and we could talk about a whole bunch of different highways, is hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. But I also recognize the theory of sunk cost. And so when we talk about where we should or should not rebuild, do we have to acknowledge that there may be routes, rail, highway, or otherwise, that don't make sense to rebuild? Should we explore the options of rebuilding in different directions or taking different paths? Or was that work already done, for example, with the Coquihalla in the 1980s?
Essentially, it was done. I mean, that's part of what goes into all of it. I mean, when you think about living in the interior of British Columbia, we take it for granted now with the Coquihalla that from where I live in Vernon, I can get in a vehicle and in 5 hours, I can be in Vancouver using the Coquihalla highway system. Previous to that, I was a 7-hour drive. The expectation that we have as taxpayers is that is increased over the years. So we've now got all the transportation routes and the truck traffic that is accustomed to these shorter transportation lines, which every cent that they expend in fuel, in transportation costs, we realize in the cost of all our goods and services that we purchase at the store. So everybody is looking to try and as I get through this, the expectation has been increasing over the years, and the designs tend to follow through with that. It comes down to what does the public want, and the government will make that decision. They then say this, it comes up with a strategy going forward, and then set in place. The design is done, and once it's designed, then it will be constructed. So, I think the Coquihalla we realize that as a critical piece of infrastructure, and it will be rebuilt. They've said now they're going to have it open to single lane traffic in some sections for commercial traffic by the end of January. They've got a good system in place. So they've got process and systems to deal with this quickly, and they're doing it.
Joe, I just want to note in closing, most people will hear this on the podcast. For people listening on YouTube, you're wearing a moose hide on your lapel, and I just wanted to ask you about it before I thank you for your time.
Sure. Well, the moose hide is it's a campaign. Basically, it's men and standing up to violence against women and girls.
Appreciate that, Joe. Joe Wrobel is, he's here representing JPW Group of Companies, including JPW Road Bridge Incorporated, past chair of the Canadian Construction Association. Glenn McGillivray, adjunct professor in the grad program at York University's Emergency and Disaster Management Program, and Robin Edger, formerly of the Pembina Institute, now National Director of Climate Change. What a cool role at the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Gentlemen, thanks for your time and expertise. You have delivered today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.
You bet. Great conversation there.